Welcome back to the Tu-Vie podcast, your TV movie entertainment needs podcast. I am your host, James, and today we have a great and incredible guest here with us today. He is an animator, writer, director for some incredible Pixar shorts like Geri's Game, One Man Band, and Bernie, and even some incredible feature-length films like Finding Dory and my absolute favorite, Lightyear. And now he is a curator of public libraries. Mr. MacLane, how are you doing today? Thank you so much for joining the podcast.
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for your time. So I thought we would just kick her right off. What drove you to become an animator for Pixar? That's kind of the first question I wanted to.
Well, yeah, why did I become an animator at Pixar? When I was in school, I really wanted to I went to I went to the Rhode Island School of Design, and I was interested in being maybe a comic book artist, maybe getting into animation. So I was kind of doing a variety of things, the stuff I was interested in, making films with my friends and trying to figure out how to animate. And contextually, this was post, like right post Lion King. So
Mm,
Lion King had come out and made all this money, and 2D seemed to be the future. And to be an animator at Disney, you had to do a bunch of animal drawing. You'd be really good at animal drawing and figure drawing. And I was fine, but I don't think I was good enough to get in to be an animator at Disney at that time. And DreamWorks was also getting started and booting up, and there was this huge call for animators, and so most of them went to Disney. Now, if you were a good enough artist to go to Disney, you would spend a lot of time like working your way up to where you would be animating main characters and working on the performance. And what was neat about doing CG at the time is it was kind of in its infancy.
mm,
Only Toy Story had come out. So we were learning along the way, kind of helping each other figure it out on kind of on the job
hmm.
as we were doing it. And so luckily I got hired at Pixar because as an intern because they needed animators and they'd lost most of their animators from Toy Story because the software was so laborious
Mm.
that people just like it was just horrible to animate and or there was a break in time and the animators were let go. I'm not totally sure. So luckily I was given the internship and my good friend let me sleep on his couch during the internship and then I was hired after that and luckily I was able to kind of learn what I didn't know on the job, which is a lot.
Yeah, I bet it's kind of the creative process. That's how Pixar has always been. Learning on the job and taking creative outlooks on certain characters and in certain processes. I feel like it's been like where they have born Pixar from.
Sure.
Yeah, and your first movie was Toy Story 2, correct? That was the one you first started working on when
That
you
was the one I was hired for.
gotcha.
They it was going through a number of story changes at the time. So the first film I technically worked on while we went on a hiatus and I worked on Jerry's Game for a
That's right.
bit. And then I went and did some work on A Bug's Life. I did a couple of shots in a Bug's Life. And one of the things I did for Bug's Life was, and this is like the first stuff I was doing, I had to animate the background bugs in the bug bar.
Mm.
And it was a lot of work. And the technology at the time was such that they said, okay, we'll just animate like a lot of stuff, like you have one table full of bugs and
Mm.
animate those bugs. And I'm like, what do I do? And so then I came up like a dumb joke. I don't remember what the joke was, but I had the one beetle telling a couple of other beetles a joke, and I animated that. It was all there was no dialogue recording. I just to give myself a sense of like, what are they doing? So I did that, and I animated. It was like 1,500 frames, and then someone else applied it to the shot. But what they did was they applied it to the sequence.
Hmm.
So 1,500 frames of the animation I did. At 1,500 frames into the sequence, the characters stop moving. They just freeze. I think one of them, maybe his head starts rotating. And
Really?
you can see it in the movie. You
Really?
can see the moment when it breaks. And once you see it, you'll never be able to unsee it. Now, there's the shot where it breaks, right, is in the background of the mosquito ordering the blood
Oh,
shot.
okay. Yeah, the type O
But
shot or something. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, but Bloody Mary, O positive or whatever. And
Yeah.
so then so that shot was animated by a friend of mine, Andrew Gordon,
Wow.
and it was like a long running, like kind of razzing joke between us that he felt like I had ruined his shot by having the animation stop, even though I didn't apply the animation. What should have happened is it should have been applied to each shot. It wouldn't have
Sure.
mattered. It was just the background thing. But it's
Mm-hmm.
more of a testament to the value of his animation
Mm-hmm.
that the background characters can completely freeze and the shot breaks and nobody is looking there because his animation is so good.
Yeah, and I just
So
rewatched Bug's Life, so now I got to go back and rewatch it and go catch that scene again.
yeah,
It's
it's again, it's a testament to audience attention and where you're looking.
that's really
But yeah,
cool.
so that was, and then I went on to Toy Story 2,
Hmm.
and really didn't know what I was doing. It
Mhm.
was great. Well, I mean, that wasn't ideal, but I had to kind of learn on the job. And again, like I said, we were figuring it out at the time. There was
Mhm.
no other. There were very few, the tools were advancing, and we would just sort of have a bag of tricks that you could kind of see what you could do to get away with, just get the shot finished.
Sure.
And so uh, one of the things I was always attracted to Buzz as a character to animate. He's kind of robotic, and I like robots and toys. And so when the second Buzz Lightyear, we call him the diluted Buzz Lightyear. There was a shot that Billy Merritt, one of the animators, had done. It's the shot of Buzz, the second Buzz, the diluted Buzz, poking his head up in Al's car, looking left and right. And there was like this kind of crazed, insane attitude to it that I really responded to. And so I
Hmm.
took that, and then I was mixing that with the storyboards that Bob Peterson had done, that were these really funny drawings. Bob Peterson drew these hilarious drawings that you'd be laughing at the drawing, which is a challenge because sometimes how are you going to get a gag from a drawing into the movie, especially with CG, where it adds all this information. So
Hmm.
I took that, and it's Buzz saying the they're in the ducks, and he says something. Now let's move, and he does this kind of like uh,
Oh, yeah.
football
Yeah.
referee like touchdown pose. That
Yes.
was straight from the boards,
Really?
and yeah, that was 100% from the boards. And I was just trying to get Bob Peterson's comedy of
Hmm.
drawing into the character. Now, the truth was, is I was terrified because I did not know how to animate very well. And
Hmm.
but what I could do was pose the character. It's easier to be an animator if you can draw.
Sure.
And so what I did was I just made the funniest poses I could and moved between those poses as fast as I could. And that was funny. And so that kind of saved my bacon for a while because I didn't have to kind of hide behind these funny, quick movements.
Sure.
And we were discovering uh, just how to do it on kind of on the fly.
Yeah. And I think with a character like Buzz that is so animated, he's a very wouldn't robotic in the sense where he's kind of different than all the toys since he has those action figure like qualities. Where was like blur movements kind of heavily used, or what was the process of animating a very active character like that entail, and how other than like for like for Jerry's game or even Bernie and One Man Band, those other characters you were animating, how did that differ in the creative process? Because you're taking inspiration from the drawings, but for these ones like in the shorts compared to the movies in those different characters, what was the differences in the approach?
Well, Buzz and Woody were probably the most successful human stylization that Pixar had at the time. You compare Buzz or Woody to Andy. Andy's kind of grotesque, certainly in the first movies. And Jerry, I think Jerry of Jerry's Game was very successful at the
Hmm.
time because Jan Pinkava, the director, was a fantastic sculptor.
Hmm.
And if you look at his sculpture, and it was kind of a little weird because I think he was sculpting like what he was going to look like at that age, which is like playing the long game. Uh, but yeah, he's an amazing sculptor, and so I think it really comes from design. But you're dealing with the physicality of whatever you have to animate.
Hmm.
At the time, especially with the how hard it was to animate complex characters, it's just as far as what feedback you'd get from the computer, it was harder to animate Geri.
Hmm.
Uh, and Buzz and Woody, they would move around quickly,
Hmm.
and you could use stand-ins. If you look at some of the making of books or something like that, you might see a thing like a stand-in for Woody that looks like two eyes and some teeth floating on what
Yeah.
looks to be rolled up paper. Those were stand-ins that were necessary because the computing power would be able to handle those a lot better.
Huh.
And the thinking was, is if you could animate and have the idea read with just that, it was only going to get better when you added more information.
Oh, okay. All right.
So as far as handling them differently, it's just the weight. It it's easier to animate things, or it's you're always trying to create weight and believability in animation, and the toys were easier to do that
Hmm.
than say larger characters where you have to create weight because weight takes time.
Hmm.
And then when you have to animate things that take time, the shots are longer. There's fewer places to hide. What I was saying with the Buzz situation
Hmm.
is it was, really it was easier to animate because you could kind of get in and get out and you didn't have a lot of variables to work with. And it would only grow more complicated as you would get into things like the human characters where there were just more controls you had to manage.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's a really interesting fact, talking about the weight of each character and how that creative process of having to understand what's necessary for each character, like like saying Buzz and those quick poses you had to move into to keep with the storyboard, and Jerry being modeled after this guy who is essentially molding himself at this age of the character. That creative process, is it more singular to like the what the animator believes can be done with the character and that efforts of the computer, or is it kind of like a base understanding that everyone kind of has, like, okay, this character has to have this sort of weight to it at all times, or does it kind of fluctuate with the scene needs?
Well, I think the goal of any scene is to not break the realism
Hmm.
for the audience.
Hmm.
And the audience isn't necessarily the world's best judge of quality animation or low quality. That doesn't really matter other than does anything take you out of the movie?
Hmm.
So there are shots certainly where more attention is paid, and there are shots you'll remember. Sometimes it's for the story,
Hmm.
sometimes it's for the animation, but usually it's the story and the characters and where you are in the movie and what the goal of it is. Like the end of the day, any movie is just the feeling you have when you leave the theater.
Hmm.
So the director is in charge of modulating what to focus on at any one time.
Hmm.
So it's the animator's job is to bring that, to be part of that symphony. And so it's kind of similar to if you're piloting, the Enterprise, or they have a finite amount of power, and you're
Hmm.
going to divert the shields to the phasers or to the life support system. That's what the captain does in on a Federation starship. It's similar to directing where you need to focus on the most important thing. If life support is most important, and in the animation case, you don't want to break the spell of what the audience thinks about the film.
I gotta say, those sci-fi references I think are absolutely incredible. The Enterprise and diverting power, I think that's truly awesome in the sense of collaboration and the way that the mindset you kind of have to have with animation. And I know Buzz is such a very big important character to you, and so the changes I'm assuming goes from each different project with this character, because in Toy Story 2 there was the moment where he had to uh, kind of force the other Buzz, I can't remember the name, but it's a great name for him, to believing he is a toy again. And then he then goes into the third movie and has to then deal with the moving away from college. So when growing with this character, was there a sense of like duty you had to feel like you felt with each new project he was a part of?
Well, it's not so much duty as it is affection.
Hmm.
I think the core defining element of Buzz is that what makes Buzz work is that there's always a disagreement over the nature of reality.
Hmm.
He thinks the world is one way,
Hmm.
and then the world is actually another way. Now that's a real challenge when he finds out he's a toy. How are you going to, after Toy Story, now that he knows he's a toy, where are you going to go? It's like, well, then you have to have the second Buzz Lightyear, and then he ends up flipping the roles are reversed, and he has to tell Woody that to remind him that he's a toy. So,
Hmm.
and then in the third one, they have to invent. He goes back to demo mode. So there's all of these ways of trying to like turn back the clock to make him interesting. And that was a challenge for Lightyear because how are you going to have him be a disagreement over the nature of the reality when he's the main character?
Yeah.
And so that's the amount of energy spent into making him the pilot out of time
Hmm.
so that he has a different idea of what's important. That's the only way I could think of to separate that and make that true to the spirit of the character is that the people he would meet, he would have a disagreement about what was going on.
Hmm.
And the nature of self-delusion. It's interesting, um, there, in some ways, Lightyear's a controversial film, but people didn't like the Zurg thing. But Buzz having a duplicate of himself to me is fundamental to
Yeah.
Toy Story.
Yeah.
There are duplicates of Buzz, and so that was that's kind of a nod to that idea. But ultimately, him being Buzz being his own worst enemy felt thematic with Toy Story
Hmm.
because Buzz is ultimately his own worst enemy until he accepts in the Toy Story films that it's not about him.
Hmm.
And he's so singularly focused on duty that he often neglects the greater good. And so when he embraces getting back to Andy's, that's when he saves Woody. It's when he has to go through that dark period of realizing his lack of worth.
Hmm.
He's such a heroic character, and that's one of the challenges because so many of our narratives are about uh, individualism,
Hmm.
rugged individualism, and the success of that. When the reality, the kind of unsexy reality, is it's actually a bunch of people.
Hmm.
When you're making a movie, you and it's based on a true story, they'll take sometimes, oh, this is actually five people, but we're going to make it into one because we need it to be digestible by people.
Sure.
And that's the same thing with filmmaking.
Hmm.
It's not one person, it's a group of people. And the many times it's the group of people of which group they had then, and how they worked together and the way that orchestra worked together. It's not the same orchestra every time. It's different. There was never a time that was the same. Change was the only constant at the studio. And I would say the most fun was when it was smaller, when we were all working on the same project together,
Hmm.
and we were invested in the success of the studio from, it felt like everybody worked on every film. And I think that the films, and it's a luxury now, they can't, they made a choice to expand, and that's a whole nother
Yeah.
thing. But I would say around I think we knew it at the time. When we were doing Incredibles, that sense of camaraderie and there was a balance of like pushing the technology and the potential of what the film could be, both in genre and in animation,
Hmm.
was such a compared to what we'd done before, was such a huge leap and was such a learning process for the animators and for the studio in general. It was kind of not possible when Brad started on that film.
Hmm.
That was the most fun.
The
And
Incredibles.
oh yeah, as
Wow.
far as the amount like you know what had been done before, it's a moment in time because
Sure.
there's no the sense of what that meant for animation at the time. how
Hmm.
it was received,
Mm.
how exciting it was to work on, how much we didn't know, how much we had to learn. And at the time, we really were so excited about working on the film, and everyone gave it their all so much that the animation crew shirt was uh, uh, it was like a tube of ointment that had been squeezed out, like it was a photograph of like a white ointment tube that had been wrung out. It had like, like this, like a toothpaste tube that had been
Yeah,
crinkled up,
sure.
and there was just the Incredibles logo on it. But people really, and it wasn't like they weren't putting in the extra time because they were asked to. They really felt like they were working on something special.
Yeah.
And I think that it's hard to recapture that place, that sense of time, and the people that were all working together on that film.
Sure, and I think The Incredibles, personally, is one of the best superhero films of all time. It is unremarkable. It's like it's uncompared to anything else. It's its own thing, and I had the opportunity to go see it in theaters like
Mhm.
about a year ago, and they put it back. And actually getting to see it, it's not as like this little kid when it came out. I think I was barely two. Actually getting to see it on the big screen is incredible, and it feels so different than all the other Pixar movies for the better. There's that it felt like that push of animation where the water physics was great and just it felt so off because it Bugs Life there was the crowd shots of all the ants and then Toy Story taking these characters and adding that realism at the time, but this The Incredibles I think is still just so monumental.
Well, that's great to hear. I mean, I feel the same way. One of the benefits that that film has is that Brad had been working on it for 15 years
Mm,
before, like or something like it was some long
15.
period of time. It was a metaphor for his frustrations at trying to get back to making movies and being
Really?
frustrated by the industry. And I think that having a core emotional story that was
Huh.
easily translated to superhero story, like it all kind of made sense. I agree
Sure.
that it's one of the best superhero movies. I mean, I don't know, there aren't many that I could name better. I don't know, I can't see that as a movie. It's like a collection of images to me just because I've seen it so much. I love it,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
yeah.
No, and I think now that you mentioned that Brad Bird working on this for 15 years trying to get the story made, I now kind of see the similarities between him and Mr. Incredible wanting to get back into the old days and being the hero again, kind of like we were saying that Brad was wanting to, make these movies. It's now something that's really more clear now.
Yeah, no, it's he was working as a consultant on Simpsons, but trying to get a bunch of projects made that just he couldn't get
Really?
off the ground.
I didn't know that.
And it's hard to do that. But Brad, I mean, all the directors are different. Brad
Sure.
was a great director, and was able to rally the support of the crew better than any other director. And you really
Wow.
felt like he has this kind of it's us against the system kind of mentality, I think, kind of forged from having to fight for the movies he's had to make.
Sure. Yeah.
And it was tremendously gratifying. And that crew will always have will always have that experience to kind of to as a baseline for our shared sacrifice and or triumph.
Yeah, no, I would definitely call it a triumph because that movie's incredible. And I kind of want to go back to something you were talking about when talking the difference between Toy Story and Lightyear. The big thing about Lightyear is that yes, it is very different, but I think the greatest thing about that is, as a personal Buzz fan and just as a Toy Story fan too, getting to watch the movie that Andy saw that made him fall in love with the Buzz character and the Buzz toy that then, sparked the whole Toy Story, story. I think it's incredible that you wanted to pay homage to the original Buzz in Toy Story with small details and phrases and certain things like the reflection of his face in the helmet as he's landed on Takani Prime and he's just, doing the whole narration to himself. But at the same time, you also wanted to create a different story for Lightyear, which would be the movie. And there was a lot of different concepts you were working on. Like you were wanting to make Zurg, his dad or Buzz going to the future to find him and being the volunteer pilot to explore light travel, coming up with all these different incredible ideas. what was the core that you wanted to keep in all of the thought process and eventually making to the final cut? What was just that one thing you wanted to keep no matter what?
I think that I was always attracted to the idea that um, Buzz needed to choose. This is a weird thing, but like Buzz gains a family or
Mm.
Buzz chooses to die.
Oh,
He's a character like in the sense that he's settling down or he's
sure.
choosing to be a parent. Like a parent is the idea of
Mm.
you know, you're preparing these offspring to carry on your air quotes legacy or your
Mhm.
whatever genetic information. But it was more that that I was fascinated and horrified by the idea of what Buzz could represent as a character,
Mm.
in the sense that he is this hero who, uh, you know, I didn't, there's a lot of conflicting ideas in the movie, but certainly
Sure.
I think making a straightforward kind of uh, hero, superhero movie about Buzz was less attractive to me.
Mm.
And then there's a simpler movie that is just, um, more of it's closer to the Buzz Lightyear of Toy Story, and it has Tim Allen. But I really one of the reasons for picking with Chris Evans is trying to say this is actually a different thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's complicated, and I think that is was certainly confusing to a lot of people. But
I
in
think
the
it was a
80s,
great choice though, personally, because
thank you,
I've
thank
read
you.
a lot about when the movie was coming out about the choice with Chris Evans, and there were some people who were I had to sit down with them like, look, this isn't Toy Story like prequel. This is what Buzz is inspired of in Toy Story. So there's going to be a degree of separation, and I think that was really interesting how you were saying that you wanted to make Buzz his own enemy by making Buzz the enemy, and kind of like how
Yeah,
in the future
literally him having to choose like
yeah,
what choice would I make if I could go back and redo that choice.
yes,
The path that if he hadn't have met those people
mm-hmm,
in the second act, then he would have made the same choices. Just in the sense that like all of media, like the idea, like one of the things that was really frustrating me was this idea of the way people wanted to see themselves as a hero in their own story
exactly,
constantly, kind of main character syndrome. And so to me, having a character who was the main character who'd never seen a movie where they didn't see themselves as the main character, coming to grips that maybe there was more to it than that. And since
mm-hmm,
that felt inherently Toy Story,
mm-hmm,
since Woody is the guy who thinks of himself as the leader and then ultimately has to eat some humble pie, that felt very in keeping and echoing into the Toy Story world, because the Toy Story world is very much a an ever expanding
yeah,
cast of weird
yeah.
toys, which I love. But I wanted to have both that and the story and investigating the story.
Yeah, and I thought it
Um,
was really incredible how,
yeah,
it's a very simple concept of like kind of fighting with yourself, but then exaggerating the concept where it's like the people you meet along the way help choose your choices in the end of it. Because like you said, if Buzz had to met Izzy, Mo, and Darby, and maybe even Socks. Well, actually, Socks was included in the other one. I forgot about that. But the influence those characters had on both, Socks and Buzz, that choice he probably would make again because you saw that in the film. He wanted to help go back in time and correct the mistake that would have never eventually happened if he did. And I think that was a really cool choice. How it's a simple like, would you go back in time and fix the mistake you made? And most people would say yes, but never see what would kind of like a butterfly effect. And I think that was a really great
totally.
choice.
You are have totally got what I was going for in the sense that the character at the end of the movie would not make the same choice the character at the beginning of the movie, and that's kind of what you want in a movie.
Yeah,
But and the reasons, I mean, the details of it um, are neither here nor there. But I wanted in the way that I really, growing up, I really liked the Muppet movie. And the Muppet movie was really a
fantastic
story
movie.
about how the Muppets came together.
Yeah,
And so this movie essentially was how I felt at the time at the studio.
mm,
Whereas I had been at the studio for decades,
Hmm.
and I saw the world around. I saw my job. I was essentially doing the same thing, and and I was trying to make a movie. It's like him trying to break light speed, and then
Hmm.
ultimately, people would come and go.
Hmm.
You'd see people live lives and die and have kids, and that was just and that, and yet the mission never changed. And
Hmm.
it's like I felt like a person out of time, and that was really, you're especially at that time at the studio, it was really like, what's your story, and a lot
Hmm.
of the story that most people have it would be like, oh, my parents didn't want me to be an artist, and I showed them that I have value, and the kind of Billy Elliot movie, which the studio has made about 10 of that story, and it's either that or Midnight Run, for a
Hmm.
long time, that those are the two films that they felt like they would remake very successfully. So, but I didn't have that relationship with my parents,
Hmm.
and I didn't really feel, you know, my heritage is uh, thin. It's like
Hmm.
Scottish. They'd already done a Scottish picture, so it was. I think I wasn't really interested in that. I think there's not a heritage that hadn't been exploited there. So
Hmm.
I that's really where I was coming from, and I think
Hmm.
that it's really the a middle-aged man looking at the choices in the corporate machine movie.
Hmm.
And I think there's I don't know how commercial that is, but there you go.
Well, I think, taking the concept of being a sci-fi fan and growing with this character like Buzz and getting to make the movie that Andy saw, because from what I understood, you co-directing Finding Dory was kind of this push into making Lightyear, if I'm correct there.
Well, I mean, I was very fortunate to have Andrew Stanton as a mentor,
Hmm.
and he had been the executive producer on Bernie and on Toy Story of Terror.
Hmm.
And so I did go into development after uh, um, finding Dory. And I think that there was, you know, what I was going to, like I think there was an interest to do another Toy Story, but I didn't really want to do that. So that's the Lightyear was a pitch to kind of get away from that idea to do something
Yeah.
unusual.
Sure.
Uh,
And I think overall, I think Lightyear is an incredible movie. I've seen it
Thank you.
time and time again, and it takes the character of Buzz to a different degree, and I still think it keeps the characteristics of Toy Story Buzz, which is people commonly had associated with it. But then when you sit down and actually watch it, you get this experience that kind of goes past the toy Buzz, and I think that's just a really cool story. And
Thank you.
and like you, I'm a big sci-fi fan, so this was just right up my alley. It was Buzz, sci-fi. There was literally everything about this movie I've wanted for a movie forever, and I
Oh, that's
couldn't be
great.
more excited. Yeah, and I think it's such an incredible, you know, uh, moment. Like you were saying, yeah, at Pixar, that you're seeing kind of the similarities with Buzz, where you felt like a person at a time. And I got to be honest, that moment with Alicia as he's going through and doing all the different tests with the XL planes, in that moment he opens the office and she's not there. I felt a little betrayed. I was expecting one more happy ending, and then I just got a gut punch to the just of emotion. I never not cry at that scene. It's an incredible moment, and I think
Thank you.
it's just so it was so out of left field for me. Like, oh, it's a Buzz adventure, and then emotion. Like, it was so perfect though. It works perfectly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it's hard to strike a balance. At the studio, they do the audience expects a certain thing from a Pixar film right now.
Hmm.
And I think that that's not great for Pixar in the sense that they want a Sad Labs movie, that made that they had that Sad Lab. Have you seen that Sad Labs short? I can't remember if it was like SNL or somebody. It was something like SNL made
I
it a
think
whole thing
so.
about Pixar Sad Labs, like how they had a
Yes.
laboratory.
Yeah.
And I think that I would say that one of the things that Lightyear doesn't do is it has the Sad Labs moment in Act One instead of Act Three, which
Hmm.
is certainly it's a choice.
I
But
thought that was a
the
cool choice.
thank you. But
Yeah.
the yeah, so I think that that's kind of where I think I wanted the sci-fi movie to be something that felt like it wasn't talking down to
Hmm.
the audience. And again, I think that the opening one of the challenges is the opening crawl was something that was added last minute because they didn't Disney didn't know what the movie was.
Hmm.
And I think that I don't think we were as strict to it's the movie that Andy saw throughout. It was that was the pitch to make the film,
Hmm.
but it changed a bit since then, and so there was a big push to kind of go, well, can we see Andy watching it in the theater? Well, we couldn't technically. That was not feasible for
Sure.
a variety of reasons.
Sure.
Modeling a bunch of kids watching a movie was
Okay.
not budgetarily feasible. But I think that it started getting people thinking about, well, why this or why not that? Now, in the 80s, movies like Rambo,
Mm.
First Blood Part 2, and RoboCop, they were R-rated films that then had cartoons.
Oh, that's
And
true.
so the more complicated answer is the toy from Buzz Lightyear from Toy Story is from a Buzz Lightyear cartoon
Mm.
that was a watered down version of a grittier R-rated film.
That's a good point. That's a good point because
So
they did have that TV series. Was that kind of like
yeah,
that middle ground of separation that you were kind of saying that
yeah,
this is the animated RoboCop to then the toy?
yeah. So
Okay.
that's hard. It's hard to encapsulate that into an opening crawl. And
Sure.
to be critical, one of the criticisms that I had gotten early on in the development process is they were like, "This is a little bit too much like a Cameron film," and I'm like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly." So there is a darker, grittier, more more severe version of the movie, and I think that there's whatever that you have to it's hard you make what you can with the limitations that you're presented, and that's how you get a movie. That's the nature of the process. But it's interesting to think about like lower budget live action filmmaking is
Mm.
what sci-fi is fits hand in glove with
Hmm.
that because you can get a lot, but you have to create everything for animation, and that's a challenging limitation.
Yeah. And
um,
you've said commonly that the challenges with using this technology, there has been something that you use, as you have said, the antithesis of the computer, which is Legos. And I think getting to use Lego pieces as a piece of inspiration, like making the armadillo and making the Eric robots, to then having them look almost like a one-to-one recreation on the screen and then in their figures, I think that's a really brilliant way because kind of having to manually pick and choose these pieces to represent certain, tactility, like you were talking about how this ship had to have specific interiors to make it feel real, because if it feels real, it will become real. And I think then using Legos as, this opposite to something digitally programmed that takes, specific planning, these pieces that can invoke creativity and freedom, I think is a brilliant choice. And how often has Legos kind of been like the origin for a lot of these, concepts outside of the ships or characters?
well, I use Lego just as a sculpting medium,
Mm.
so it was just a way to be thinking about form, and
Mm.
was experimenting with that. That was there. I think that there was part of me that was excited about like looking at it through the lens of how the film would have been designed in the 80s to maximize toys in the
Mm.
same way that Star Wars was. So, for
Absolutely.
example, Buzz has a number of outfits. There were even more outfits that we would again not a priority for the budget, but would have been
Mm.
more expensive. Where every time he went back in time, he would have a different outfit with a different ship.
Hmm.
And in the art of the book, there's an indication of what that might have looked like. And that was
Yeah.
meant to be kind of like the way that the Batman toys of the 90s were always like, well, you can get a Batman, but you can also get a, glue attack Batman who's, you know, brown. And there would always be this
Yeah.
kind of it was actually hard to find the main Batman.
Hmm.
And so that kind of idea in the toy world, like that's something I kind of like went with. And likewise with the spaceships in the first act, it was meant to be like, oh, we're just gonna find a way to introduce all these ships,
Hmm.
and like finding a story reason for that, I thought was like a fun challenge.
And I did like when, as the movie started coming out, closer to its premiere, the toy promotionals were coming out, and I remember shopping, I think for like a birthday of something, and I saw like a row of all the different ships and all the different Buzz Lightyears with it, and I just was like, this is gonna be awesome because I've always liked that bit of movies where they show the progression of time by having those changes, but they're subtle. So like different color changes or different design things. Because the first test ship was very bulky, almost like a smaller rocket ship, but then it became more sleek, like a fighter jet. And I thought that
Hmm.
the comparison with people stuck on the planet and having to use these resources, and Buzz only gone for 4 or 5 minutes, is so. I just thought it was really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's going from the Lightyear. You've now started a side quest with the Berkeley Book Report. I'm very curious as to how that got started.
Well, I am um I'm pursuing live action film,
Hmm.
and I'm really excited. I have a number of projects that are in various states. I have scripts that I've written. I
Wow.
have some that have actors attached. I
Ooh.
have there are other things I didn't write that I'm attached to direct. There are things that I'm attached to write. There's a bunch of stuff. In
Hmm.
live action though, uh, you kind of sit around and wait.
Hmm.
It's a different it's a different rhythm. So
Sure.
while I was waiting for a particular project to kind of like get to the next stage, I just got tired of not making anything. So I
Sure.
started this kind of silly little kind of web series. I don't know what it is, a web series of pretending to be a guy who kind of a version of myself that was earnest and not very bright, and would travel his local neighborhood as a self-appointed librarian to the little free libraries, because we have a number of them in where I live in Berkeley, California, and
Hmm.
and so I just started playing around. There's just a way to kind of, because I would go on a walk and I would go on a walk, and then so I started videoing and having a challenge for, can I, because you only get a minute and a half on that format, the
Hmm.
Reels format on Instagram. So the videos, if you go to my Instagram, whatever, at Angus MacLane, the videos are shot while I'm like on a walk. Stories figured out as like I'm kind of making up as I go along, and I'm editing it while I'm walking.
Oh, really?
So and I'll do a little bit after the fact, and I'll record oftentimes after it. But it's kind of an experiment to just make something as quickly as you can, because it's the antithesis in making an animated film or a live action film. It takes forever to do anything.
Hmm.
But the idea of like the only thing it was a creative challenge to myself of like, how can I just create something from nothing on a daily basis? And so and I'm whatever 36, 37 episodes in, and each one is like a minute, minute and a half, and they're silly. They're totally dumb.
No,
But
I think they're a lot of fun. I thought it was a
but
really
they
cool way to kind of just pass the time, but also, challenge yourself on creating a different episode where one may follow up after another, like the lady that threw the book at you, or
Yeah,
the kid,
there's the book thrower.
the
Yeah.
book thrower, and the kid that stole your backpack. And I think
Yeah.
even just like the small bits of like that Bill Clinton book following you around in that one video,
Yeah.
I just think that it's a really creative way, but at the same time, I think it's also a fun miniseries. I hope we continue
Thank
on
you.
into other projects, like behind the scenes, what Berkeley Book Report behind the scenes, and these next projects you're working on. I just
Yeah.
think it's a really fun
Thank you.
project.
Well, there was I was inspired a little bit by Schizopolis, which is a movie that Soderbergh made after making a number of films. He made Sex, Lies, and Videotape, and then proceeded to make two or three films that weren't successful commercially, and kind of got back to his roots by making Schizopolis. And Schizopolis is a kind of absurdist film that it utilizes a lot of really interesting, a variety of editing techniques.
Mm.
And it's worth seeing just for the editing alone. It's awesome, and he stars in it. And so there's something about that, by taking that format and having to kind of do everything internally, and the limitation of like you have everything in the world of libraries and books, and what variations on that theme can I do? And a lot of times it's like, what are the happy accidents? Like, if I come across something unusual, because it kind of all started because one of the little free libraries near me, someone was divesting themselves of their entire Criterion collection, and they had really good DVD
Whoa.
taste. And so every day I'd go on this walk, and I would find I was getting stuff like Dr. Zhivago and Reds, and uh, just yeah, a bunch of really wild
Wow.
ones. And it kind of, and it's since dried up, so don't look there anymore. And I'm not going to say which one it is because I try to keep that secret.
Yeah, that's
But
that
so
gatekeeping Criterion Collection movies. I think is a okay. That one I understand.
yeah, yeah. So that was my first. I was like, oh well, maybe I should, you know, I put some movie. There would be things I would get,
Mm.
and I go, oh, I already have this, and I'd put it back, or I would, because I'm really into physical media, and have been for a while, and it's ended up paying off well as far as the ability to access to see the movies that I enjoy, and to
Exactly.
so yeah,
This
that's kind of where it started from. Thank you for watching. It's totally silly, but again, I think the fascinating thing it's meant to be, the value of it is it's not like a, it's just an outlet to make something, and to make films
yeah.
of a with a very limited. It can only be a minute and a half. The phone, I have like an old phone, and at a certain number of cuts, it slows down, and I kind of have to like hold it together with you know chewing gum, and so that's. But the running gag is like he's totally he's completely oblivious, and is um he's a character who has like a running list of grievances and enemies, and there's all these people that are out to get him, yet he's like ultimately the master of his own destruction.
Mm.
Like he can't help but getting in his own way.
If, at first, it
I
felt
just
very
find that
Pee Wee
hilarious.
Herman with this childlike wonder of excitement
Mm-mm.
of getting to look at these new books and fixing the libraries and even your own turns of phrases like Paul Bunyaning or the way you would kind of just make it seem like it's this unknown community that you're actually shedding
Yeah,
light on. You're like, guys, you didn't know
yeah,
about
yeah.
this. This is going on for the last 20 years. Like the award ceremonies and stuff like that.
Well, I
I think
think
that's
there's so much
great.
in common. Thank you. I think there's a lot in common that special interest fan, or whatever community that you have, is actually those are more similar to each other
Mm,
than dissimilar.
mm,
And I would say the fan communities I'm in are in film fans and Lego.
mm.
And
Two great communities.
film film fan, well, yeah, but film fans are like, kind of everyone is sort of a film, like
That
that
is true.
that's not
That
as
is true.
niche.
That
But
is
the
true.
niche, or it used to be, now it's like, the joke is everyone, kids want to watch the shortest thing on the smallest screen they can find, separated from everybody else. The
True.
There's something about, in the Lego community, there are terms
Mm,
that people throw around, that there's just shorthand. There is personalities
mm,
that are common. There's inevitably there's someone that wants to be a leader that shouldn't be a leader.
mm.
And so there's these amalgam of personalities that you get in any sort of fandom that I think is hilarious. Um, there is uh, the character the character that I play is very much rigidly adheres to a set of standards that he believes is the right way, and
Sure.
is kind of is dogmatic about that. And I feel like there's a universality to that. And
Sure.
so what's been fun to me is to go, well, he doesn't believe in green books, and so he has
Yes.
this prejudice against them, and so he'll remove them from the libraries,
Mm.
and then that joke will kind of carry through.
Yeah.
I think it's Easter eggs for people that have been paying attention.
Yeah,
But
it's a
I don't
very subtle
understand
thing.
how
You
the
just grab the
algorithm
books
works.
and move along with all the green ones. There's like a stack of three greens and like
Yeah,
a
yeah.
one little thin, worn out. But I just think it's great.
A lot of times it's stuff that an idea for the story will come from just stuff that I find.
Hmm.
Like I'll find this one book, and then this will happen. There'll be stuff that, like the Bill Clinton one is interesting because when I did that one, I was like the pitch was, or the idea was, I'm gonna find a group of books and then I'm just gonna like transfer them from library to library and
Mhm.
pretend like each library has the same
Yeah,
has that was going to be the joke. Is it?
it's
Oh
so
my gosh,
good.
all it's getting to be that the stock is the same everywhere.
Yeah,
Problem was when I saw the footage is you couldn't tell that they were the same books except for the Bill Clinton uh, one, and I didn't and I didn't want it to be. I avoid doing anything inherently political.
sure. Yeah,
Uh, just it's distasteful and
yeah,
certainly it wasn't. Yeah. Anyway,
yeah. There
so
wasn't any
the
political like stance. You were
it
just taking.
wasn't
You
meant
just
to be.
yeah,
Wasn't meant to be political. So I kind of was
yeah.
on the fence about like I didn't want this to be so riding that line and figuring out like how do I workshop sometimes some of them like that one I sat on for a couple of days going
Hmm.
how because I don't want him to be because there are things there are for example a lot of like religious literature
Mhm.
or political literature that'll be in the boxes and I don't want to make a story point of removing that even though that is technically against the ethos of the Little Free Library organization, to which I do not in real life want to run afoul of. But
Sure,
I
sure.
I try to adhere to the strict standards that the spirit of the law that they, which means no propaganda. That's one of their things. So,
Hmm.
but again, hit the character. It's funny if the character is the more truthful it is,
Hmm.
the funnier it is. Some of
Yeah,
the episodes get a little weird, and I don't know if they're some of them are successful, some of them are not successful. But I think the weirder, the more somehow the more basic, like simple, like is that a joke? Is that not a joke? Am I?
yeah,
It's the funniest to me. I don't know.
yeah. Well, it's kind of just like making the serious not serious, where it's like in this person's world, these little libraries are the most important thing in his
Yes,
life. And I think
yes,
that's kind of hilarious because I think, I've now started paying attention and there are some little free libraries. I didn't know they were even in my neighborhood. And so now
yes.
I kind of, in this own way, feel like a sense of duty. I'm like, well, it is looking a little weird. And I just think it's kind of like when the character thinks it's funny, it's not as funny. But when your character says it as if it's like a part of his belief or as serious as it's hilarious. I think that was Bryan Cranston that said that.
Yeah, I think well that's the protagonist having a desire that stems from their greatest obsession.
Hmm.
And so the character has an obsession. They want the Little Free Libraries to be in order and then so inevitably at the end of the episode their worst fear comes true oftentimes because of their choices.
Mm.
And I think that is a story problem like every time I'm trying to, and it's interesting to watch it as it. I mean, I haven't gone back and watched them in order, but there's one where I did find, it was like a wedding congratulations card,
Yeah.
and that was real, and I really did find that, and I was like, oh, there's a sad story here, and then I realized like I'm being really literal about what I'm finding, and I could maybe be less truthful.
Sure.
And for example, that's why I find like the katana that one
Yeah.
time.
That's
And
so
it
good.
obviously wasn't actually in
It's
there.
so good.
Um,
It's so
and it
like,
was
oh, I
actually
guess
a real
yeah.
challenge. Like I didn't want to walk around the neighborhood uh, with a giant sword. So that one I ended up having to like hide. Like I was just sort of like put it in my sleeve and like
Sure.
walked funny for a while. And then like when no one was looking, I quickly did the shot and then I put it away. So to spoil it, there is an episode where my character finds a samurai sword
Yeah.
in the Little Free Library. But to me, this is all like this is not again the joke on the thing is like this is my full-time job. No, it's not. I'm writing and directing and it's all stuff that like either is too early to mention,
Mm.
is may or may not happen, or is going to happen, but is too all these things
Sure.
we'll find out eventually. But
Yeah. And I'm
that's
very curious to see what the next project you're working on. And when doing this Berkeley book report, do you kind of get like a moment of like, oh, this could actually work with my character, or this could be a really fun plot or a subplot or something that could go into your films or your writing process and all that?
well, I think it's the raw. It's more of like the rawest sense of my. It is the closest to my sense of humor,
Mm,
and this a lot of the comedy of the Berkeley Book Report is does not translate very well into longer form. It's like really
sure.
subtle or like jokes that wouldn't read. Like it's kind of like how can you explore things that you wouldn't jokes that you wouldn't necessarily write because they're so subtle or they're so weird. And so it's more of a proving ground for what I find works in comedy or
Mm,
how um, how to deliver information to the audience at the right time. For example, there is an episode where I come across a car that is my car and it's got a ticket on it.
yeah.
And I'm frustrated by that. And I think that it happens a couple of times, but there's a way to how do I stage it in the
Yeah.
timing? Like I'm working on the timing of the dialogue so that the audience gets the information of the the ticket at the right time.
Sure.
And the information that the audience gets is so key to the comedy.
Mm,
There's a great example of this in the Brad Bird was telling me about when he was making Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. In the Burj Khalifa sequence, there is a shot where Tom Cruise, who's on the side of the Burj Khalifa, he has these sticky gloves, as you'll remember, and
yes.
one of them is not working,
Hmm.
and he takes it off and throws it away. And there's this great shot where he's looking, and the camera, kind of cranes down to see that the glove is now working, but it's stuck to the side, and he's kind of frustrated by it.
Yeah.
Well, they
Yeah.
storyboarded it out, and they did the animatic, and it worked great. Always got a laugh. And then they
Mm,
shot it, and it didn't work. It
really?
didn't get a laugh. And what was happening was because the building was mirrored, it was revealing to the audience that the glove was there a beat, like say 8 to 12 frames before it did, it was revealed in the animatic, in the storyboards.
Huh.
So it was stepping on the joke. So they painted out the reflection of the glove in the existing footage that they had, and it saved the joke.
Wow.
And all that is to say, the fragility of comedy sometimes comes down to when the audience sees the thing. So all that is to say is this kind of lo-fi limited web series is a way to experiment with comedy and how the timing of cutting out of the end of it or when I say a certain thing versus when I show
Sure.
something that is a proving ground with the lowest stakes possible. Like there are so few people watching it. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't cost anything. Like it's just time and comedy. And so to me, that's what's going into the other things is that sense of what is fun. Um, don't overthink it and
Sure.
having a sense of play
Yeah.
to it. Um, I don't know.
No, I think it's great. I feel like it's very I feel like more lively Wes Anderson humor. I think it's very Wes Anderson's very kind of a quick pace and very, specific on the dialogue, but I think, having the cutoffs or specific items like the katana in the booth of it, it's very fun, but at the same time there's that background music that gives it a very
Yeah.
lively feel. Like it feels fun and whimsical, and it's like a mixture of Buster Keaton, Wes Anderson, and just so many like fun dialogue bits that I think it ultimately works out
Thank you.
accurately to what the purpose is.
Well, I suspect that that Wes Anderson thing is more of like we're influenced by similar films.
Mm,
Uh, Jacques Tati and Kubrick and all that. But I think to me is it the comedy is of what's the form of that kind of video. And in that kind of video, like you don't see my face, it's just a POV. How okay, those are limitations.
mm,
What you can see hands, having other people in it is actually quite difficult. because I'm usually doing it alone. So luckily I've had some participants, but um, yeah, it's interesting. I think of it as like when you have a blank piece of paper, it's hard to kind of come up with
Hmm.
a thing, but by giving yourself the limitation of, say, the library, it's been a very educational way for me to think about like giving myself limitations to then work from. So
I think that's great, and I'm very excited to see where the Berkeley Book Report is going next. And I cannot thank you enough for your time
thank
today.
you.
And thank you. I mean, I gotta say this as a Buzz Lightyear fan, like I said, thank you for making Lightyear.
Oh,
As a,
thank
it's
you.
so great.
Thank you.
I've watched it so many times, and it just gets better with every rewatch.
Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to all the other updates for the Berkeley Book
Thank you.
Report and all your Lego ideas. So if you guys want to go check out Lego and all the other stuff that Angus MacLane is making, check out his Instagram. He posts out some fun tutorials or just these really fun creative builds that you make from the go, and I think they're very impressive, stemming from
Thank you.
sci-fi and all the different stuff like Transformers. His pages will be shown on screen as well as linked in the description. Go check it out. And I'm very curious. There's a page that's on your Instagram that something about like a voting for a Lego idea. Do you want to
Oh
plug
yeah,
that?
there's a Lego idea project called Your Brick, which is a giant. It's like a one-to-one scale Lego skull that comes apart in sections. And the thing with Lego Ideas, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but you can vote
Yeah.
if the it's like a kind of a Kickstarter thing where if you get 10,000 votes, then it will be considered to be turned into a Lego set. Now I've done it before. I did it with the Lego Ideas Wall-E.
Whoa.
Was that was a Lego Ideas that I designed when we were making the movie. I designed it actually over a period of 10 years, and then submitted it to Lego Ideas, and then it got picked, and then I got to go through the process of making it with
Whoa.
Lego, not just as the fan creator, but also as the license approver, which was for Pixar, which was the way to go.
That's
uh,
awesome.
so that yeah, the Lego Ideas Wally is the first thing. So this is this isn't a branded thing. It's just a skull with it comes with William Shakespeare that you can fit inside the cranial
I've seen
cavity.
that.
So yeah, that's on Lego Ideas.
Oh,
So
I didn't
vote for
know that
that
that was your
today.
creation. I was seeing posts about like the new Lego idea creation stuff that's coming out, and I saw the William Shakespeare. I'm like, that's pretty
Oh,
rad.
oh, oh. This may not be the same thing. This one
Oh,
this does not have the 10,000 votes yet. But yeah, the William
oh.
Shakespeare fig is in there. But
Well,
yeah,
yeah.
so
Awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely put that on the screen
thank
and
you.
in
I'm
the
glad you
description
liked the
below.
movie,
Yeah.
and I'm glad you enjoyed the Berkeley Book Report.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. And we will see you guys next time.